Thank you, everyone. So with that, we will move forward to our welcome address by our Honorable Dean, sir. Sir, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, let me say that it's a marvelous occasion today, particularly because we have someone from halfway across the globe with us here in Kolkata and SNU to meet us all and to share with us some of his insights into the literature that we all love, English literature. Professor Vescovi is a distinguished professor in Milan University, as you all know, and may I say that it does our hearts good to have you with us, and we are delighted that you could make out the time to come and meet us in DESNU. DESNU is the Department of English, Sister Nivedita University. We call it DESNU for short. You see, one of the things that we try to do for all our students is to maybe expose them to more international talents, international information, international experts. The reason is the ideal situation is where we could all take you abroad and to give you some of the best education that the world has to offer. Now, unfortunately, that's not always possible, though sometimes I'm sure many of you will be going out from this country to other countries to learn, to research maybe, and to find more information. Alternatively, the other thing that we try to do is to bring people from outside, international guests and speakers, to expose you to their wisdom, to their insights, and to their feelings about literature. And this is just such an occasion. And may I thank all my colleagues in the Department of English, particularly Dr. Priyanka Chakraborty and our beloved head of the department, Dr. Monikinkini Vasu, for organizing this splendid occasion. Thank you so much. And once again, sir, thank you so much for being with us here today. We're really looking forward to your talk, and we hope to learn, and I'm sure we're going to learn from what you're going to tell us. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this generous introduction. And let me thank you all for being here, for making it, and thank you, the Honorable Dean. Thank you, Priyanka, for inviting me, for reaching out to me when I was up in Siliguri as a visiting professor. Then I come here to Calcutta. So I'm very happy to be here. It's a particularly important for me to share my own research with younger generations, with Indian students. You know, I am based in Italy, of course, so I do most of my research whenever I succeed in coming to India, but I always work a lot at home, obviously. And it's very important for me to have your feedback whenever I I don't think I have published any paper over the last 10 years without presenting it first to some Indian audience like yourself. And that has greatly improved my own writing. So if you have any objections, if you have any suggestions, if you have any questions, please do let me know. Thank you again. So I'll move to the podium. Is this... Yeah, can you hear me? Fine. Great. So, my topic today is the relationship between tradition and world literature. And I shall attempt a comparison between the earliest literary translations that I know of into English, and namely those by Toru Dutta, and the latest translation into English from a traditional tale, which is Jungle Nama by Amitav Ghosh. And I will contend that although more than 150 years have elapsed, the way they are working with English, the way they are using English, and the way they use the Indian tradition vis-à-vis the wide world has not changed that much. So basically, I meant to work with Toru Dutta and Amitav Ghosh, these two people you're seeing here. But when I was preparing this lecture, I realized that I could not really talk about them without bringing someone else into the picture. And I'm talking of Lal Bihari Dey. The case of Lal Bihari Dey is particularly interesting because he was also a translator of Indian fables into English. However, as you will see, it's interesting to use him as a foil because Toru Dutta and Amitav Ghosh are extremely different from Lal Bihari Dey, and their kind of cultural enterprise, their cultural project was completely different. And this is, I think, rather interesting. Okay, so in the case of Toru Dutta, she translated some stories. I will only talk about Savitri today, but anyway, she translated some stories from the Mahabharata or the Puranas into English verse. And then Amitav Ghosh translated the story of Bon Bibi, which is the goddess that presides over the forest in the Sundarbans. So these are actually their work. So let us consider the attitude towards translation of Reverend Lal Bihari Dey and Toru Dutta first. The former was a prominent intellectual, author, among other things, of an English novel, Govinda Samanta, which was published in 1874, just to give you the idea. And it's one of the best English works of the Indian Renaissance. And I would like to consider here, however, his folk tales from Bengal, which were published in 1883. Okay, so at the beginning of the 1880s. My concern here is how and why he wrote this collection. That is, what were his cultural motives and how did he realize his translation? Obviously, one should remember that the characteristics of, one of the characteristics of Indian or Bengali Renaissance really, and that is to say its very complicated relationship with Anglophilia. So the idea that everything that came from England was valuable and possibly even better than whatever was produced in India. So, shall I? Okay, like this is too much. Can you hear me at the back? Okay, fine. So, so there was this mixture, you know, of attraction and repulsion for the English. Politically, they were not so very welcome, but culturally they were. And there was this thing that was called mimicry, which you may have heard. So that it's typical of any colonial relationship, you know. Whenever you are in a colony, you try to make sense of being the colonized by recognizing some superior feature in the colonizer. And on the other hand, the colonizer tries their best to convince you that they have a good reason to be the colonizer. They have to convince both yourself and themselves for that. But anyway, this is another problem. However, keep that in mind, because that's very important when it comes to this work by Lal Behari Dey. In the introduction to the folk tales of Bengal, he explains why he was doing this thing. And he wrote, "In my peasant life in Bengal, I make the peasant boy Govinda spend some hours every evening in listening to the stories told by an old woman who was called Shambhu's mother, and who was the best storyteller in the village. On reading that passage, Captain R.C. Temple of the Bengal Staff Corps, son of the distinguished Indian administrator Sir Richard Temple, wrote to me to say how interesting it would be to get a collection of those unwritten stories which old women in India recite to little children in the evenings, and to ask whether I could not make such a collection." So you see how the whole genealogy of the thing is somehow connected to the British. More than that, he goes on saying, "I was no stranger to the Märchen of the brothers Grimm, nor to the Norse tales so admirably told by Dasent, to Arneson's Icelandic stories translated by Powell, to the Highland stories done into English by Campbell, and to the fairy stories collected by other writers. And as I believe that the collection suggested would be a contribution to that daily increasing literature of folklore and comparative mythology." So what he wanted to do was really inscribe India into the number of nations who were contributing to this world literature project that was discovering the roots. So he wanted to put Bengal at par with, say, Germany or Scandinavia. This is what he's trying to say in his introduction. And this is why he wrote this. In his talks about comparative mythology in his introduction, and also comparative philosophy. So he said Bengal is at par with the other, what he considered the most prominent nations in the world. Of course, this is a colonial mind, but today we would know better than writing such an introduction. But definitely that was the time and the way people thought back then. And then he gives, I will give you an example of how he was writing and the kind of audience he was writing for. This is one of his stories. It goes, "There was a king who had two queens, Duo and Shuo. Both of them were childless. One day, a fakir, mendicant, came to the palace gate to ask for alms. The Shuo queen went to the door with a handful of rice," and then so on and so forth. And so the story goes on. Now, what is interesting here is that he gives the names of the two queens, Duo and Shuo, and you see there's a footnote, and here is the footnote. "Kings in Bengali folk tales have invariably two queens. The elder is called duo, that is not loved, and the younger is called shuo, that is loved. So definitely he was writing for a non-Indian audience. Even, you see, when he explains what he means by fakir, and at the end of the quotation, they say, the holy mendicant refused to take alms as the hands of a woman unblessed with child are regarded as ceremonially unclean. This has much more to do with anthropology than with literature itself. And on the other hand, De's prose is as neat and elegant as the prose of any Victorian writer, which makes his philological and ethnological collection a pleasure for the reader. And he was very successful. I mean, this book was really successful in Britain, where they did, you know, also illustrated versions. This is one of the illustrations. These are two of the illustrations that you find in England that were published at the beginning of the 20th century. What is interesting here is that you see these are not Hindu, these are not, I don't know, patachitras or any kind of typically Bengali paintings. They were done by an English painter who was inspired mostly by Mughal paintings. So that was really exotic to the eyes of the English. Definitely it had nothing Bengali in itself. But that's exactly the way the translation was done. It had to sound somehow, let's say, Orientalist. They had to sound exotic. It didn't really care to talk about Bengal as such. Let's talk about Toru Dutta instead. She was an extraordinary girl stemming from an extraordinary family. Her father was Govind Chandra Dutt, whom you see there, himself a humanist and a poet. And thanks to his open-mindedness, Toru and her sister Aru were the first Indian girls to study at a university abroad, in France and in England. They learned French and English, and Toru developed an inclination for romantic poetry, which she imitated in her own verses. Toru is described by her mother in a letter as a sweet but wayward girl. And this sweet but wayward are two words that capture also her way of writing, as we shall see. In 1869, they visited Europe, including Italy, but stayed principally in France and England. In Cambridge, they studied at the newly established Girton College. Where Toru and her sister plunged in a feverish dream of intellectual effort and imaginative production. So they were very happy of being there and to study. I mean, obviously, in Cambridge, women were not allowed back then. That's why they were studying in this particular college, which was meant for women only. But basically, they were having this kind of education, international, cosmopolitan education. In 1875, Toru studied Sanskrit together with her father. And this is also interesting. Why do you think that she started studying Sanskrit? Well, she was back in Calcutta back then. So she was back in town, and they were looking for a German teacher. They were unable to find a German teacher in Calcutta back then, and then they decided, okay, we cannot waste our time. If we cannot study German, let's study Sanskrit instead. And there were plenty of pandits who would be able to teach Sanskrit. That's how she started to do that. As an exercise connected with her Sanskrit studies, she translated some Sanskrit tales into English. So after her death, which unfortunately came very early, her father opened her desk and found an incomplete English romance and several translations, together with poems, which were subsequently published as ballads and legends from Hindustan. So I will be talking ancient ballads and legends from Hindustan, sorry. I will be talking particularly about one of these, that is Savitri. Okay, so you are probably familiar with the story of Savitri, and she took it basically from the Mahabharata. However, she changed it in such a way that made it very modern, and her own views could come through the text. So she talks about Savitri and introduces her. And this is what she says about her. Her charm was this: upon her face, childlike and innocent and fair, no man with thought impure or base could ever look. The glory there, the sweet simplicity and grace, abased the boldest. But the good, God's purity, their love to trace, mirrored in dawning womanhood. So she was so beautiful, and nonetheless, she had this special boon. No man could look at her with impure thoughts. So this is typical of the typical, let's say, ancient Savitri. But besides purity, Savitri is also endowed with great freedom and with agency, which has nothing to do with the tradition, so to say. Apparently, she lived in a sort of Arcadian scenario where she could roam about completely at her own will. In those far-off primeval days, fair India's daughters were not pent in close zananas. On her ways, Savitri, at her pleasures, went whither she chose, and hour by hour, with young companions of her age, she roamed the woods for fruit or flower, or loitered in some hermitage, for the moon is grey and old, her presence was as sunshine's glad. They taught her wonders manifold, and gave her of the best they had. So, her purity transcends mere physical chastity and includes her emotional and intellectual attitudes. Emotional chastity is the most interesting insight of Toru's, because it implies an emotional intelligence which was not valued as such in the 19th century. And indeed, I think it's still underestimated even today. In one of her roamings, she espies Satyavan and falls in love with him. So, at first sight. Once at home, she consults her mother and father for permission to marry the young man, who is not actually consulted on this occasion. She takes for granted that he will have her. Her father asks Narad Muni if the horoscopes match, and Narad Muni advises her against marrying Satyavan because he has only one more year to live. Here, Savitri asserts her spirit once more. She considers love as a gift of the gods, and hence she rejects the Muni's suggestion not to marry Satyavan to avoid the fate of the widow, although her father depicts very vividly to her the hardships that widows must endure. And she says, "Once and once only have I given my heart and fate, 'tis past recall. With conscience none have ever striven, and none may strive without a fall. Not the less solemn was my vow, because unheard, and the sin will not be less if I should now deny the feeling felt within." So she says, I have pledged my love to him, even if I haven't done it publicly. That doesn't matter. I did it with my own consciousness, and my own conscience, the gods are my witness. So, and my conscience is so important, I cannot recall it. I am as well as married now. And I cannot refuse to marry him now just out of convenience. That's the kind of spiritual side that Savitri has acquired in this translation. There's another point where Toru Savitri diverges from the original, especially the Puranas versions. And it is the encounter with Yama. Well, you know that at the end, I take it that you know the story. Anyway, very briefly, after 1 year, Satyavan is going to die, and she has this discussion with Yama, and Yama eventually gives Savitri, her husband, back. Now, in the original version, she is a kind of trickster, because Yama is enchanted by Savitri, and Savitri outwits Yama in a way, because he says, okay, you can ask a boon. And she says, okay, I will ask as a boon that I may have 100 children from Satyavan. And Yama at that point cannot recall his promise, but of course, in order for her to have 100 children from Satyavan, he cannot die there and then. And for this reason, he is restored to life. Now, in the version by Savitri, which I urge you to read, it takes about 40 minutes to read the whole ballad. It's wonderful. Now, in the version by Savitri, what happens is that she actually talks to Yama in such a way that Yama is really enchanted by her intelligence and devotion. And eventually, he grants different boons to Savitri, but she is never happy because she cannot ask for Satyavan's life. And eventually, Yama himself is so moved that he actually says, okay, now please ask whatever you want. And he forgets to say, or he doesn't say, accept Satyavan's life. And at that point, she asks for Satyavan's life. Okay, but it is really a gift from Yama, which he gives because he is impressed by the spirituality of Savitri. Okay, so what used to be a kind of trickster story becomes a story about spirituality. But it's also very important, the condition of the woman, the way Toru Dutta describes her. She's free to go wherever she wants. She's free to choose her husband, and she wants to, and she simply informs her parents of what she wants, which in the 19th century was really something new. Okay, we can skip. Now, let's move on to Amitav Ghosh's The Jungle Nama. Well, this is a translation of the legend of Bon Bibi. The legend of Bon Bibi is, I don't know, whether if you have read The Hungry Tide, for instance, you know about it, or if you have Jungle Nama, obviously. It's a story, it's the myth behind this deity of the Sundarbans. The story is rather, there are so many subplots. Anyway, the point is that Bon Bibi is actually coming from the Middle East and to be the queen, the lady of the forest in the Sundarbans. And she strikes a deal with Dokin Ray. Dokin Ray is a demon who was living there, who is usually seen in his avatar as a tiger. Now, Dokin Ray, this demon, kills everyone that enters the Sundarbans. And so they fight, and eventually they have this, they strike a deal that one part of the Sundarbans will be reserved for Dokin Ray, for the tiger, and the other one will be used by humans. And no one should trespass into the other part. Now, what is interesting, this is a subplot of the story. There is this boy called Duque who is going with his uncle on an expedition into the forest. Now, the problem with the uncle is that he's particularly greedy, and he goes with 7 ships, 7 boats really, into the forest to collect timber and honey and wax. Okay. But 7 are a disproportionate number. So he is not doing it because he needs to go into the forest. He doesn't need that to live. He is simply greedy. And for this reason, he will be somehow punished. However, when he enters the forest, there is this boy with him called Dutta. Now, Dutta is an orphan. He's lost his father, and he's very poor. And Dokin Ray, so the demon, appears to the uncle and says, okay, you give me that boy as my shikar, as my prey, and you can have all the honey and all the wax that you want. And the uncle says, okay, so you can have him, and I will have all that I want. When the boy is going to die, because he sees the tiger getting at him, he prays to Bon Bibi, and Bon Bibi saves him. Okay, so this is the subplot that is recounted in Jungle Nama. So, before writing Jungle Nama, Amitav Ghosh had written this book, which is very famous for those who work in eco-criticism. It's called The Great Derangement. And there he complains that the so-called serious novel is unable to describe non-human agency. He says, I don't know why, but it's so difficult to write a novel about this. And he tells several such stories. So there's a story when he says, you know, when I was a student like you in Delhi, once there was a tornado in the, sorry, not a tornado, a cyclone in the town. And it destroyed completely a whole quarter of the town. But this was so unprecedented, and it never happened afterwards. So I kept the newspapers that were talking about that thing. I almost died, he said, on that occasion. And I kept that, and I thought of using this story in some novel. But it was so incredible, so strange, that I could not possibly use it in any of my realistic narratives. And yet, it happened in my life. So, actually, he will use it in his following novel, in Gun Island, where such an event happens in Venice, in Italy. But anyway, this is not the important thing. This is just to say that he feels that the novel is somehow flawed. It's impossible to talk about the novel. It's possible to use the novel to talk about non-human agency. And, but, he says, you can resort to other kind of fiction, other kinds of storytelling. And this is why he decides to take up the legend of Bon Bibi and turn it into English verse. Sorry, this is Gun Island, the following novel. And this is the reason why he writes Jungle Nama. So this is the story of the Sundarban, as you can see in the subtitle of the story. So what is interesting is that he had already given a prose translation of this episode in his former novel, a novel that he wrote in 2004, that is called The Hungry Tide. But in The Hungry Tide, he was showcasing the story of Bon Bibi. So in The Hungry Tide, he was actually telling the story, and The Hungry Tide is very much like a kind of encyclopedia of the Sundarbans. So he's telling, well, you know what happens, you know what they believe. This is one of the stories that are so popular in the Sundarbans. And so he is giving it. And that is showcasing the story. In Jungle Nama, what is interesting, he's not showcasing the story, he's endorsing the story. This is a huge difference. So the author, the implied author of Jungle Nama, is actually telling something he believes in. So he does not believe that the myth tells the exact truth, but he believes that the myth has a lot to teach to us humans living in the Anthropocene, to us living in the 21st century. So while the first version that he wrote, the one in the novel, was like, a kind of anthropological curiosity. Okay, you know what the people in the Sundarbans believe in, and that's something. Now he says, well, no, you know how we should think of our place in the world. You know how we should think of our relationship with nature. This is telling us that. And so this is how he writes Jungle Nama. And of course, he writes with this particular Bengali, well, an imitation of this Bengali folk meter, that is the Dwipadi Poyar. And this is the mother talking to Duke and teaching him how to use a formula to call the Bombibi whenever he is in danger. He says the Dwipadi Poyar will give your voice wings. It's the meter of wonder. Its cadence will strengthen your words. They gain in power. It will work its magic by tying your thoughts together into couplets of 24 syllables that sometimes rhyme, sometimes use half-rhymed vocables. And so this is how the power of language is also advocated in this story. So he gives the story, which is more or less what I told you. Eventually, Bon Bibi does two important things. First of all, she beats Dokin Rai. So Dokin Rai is not able to kill the boy. But what is also important, he asks the boy to forgive his uncle. So he goes back, a rich man, a rich boy, to his village, but he has to forgive his uncle. There is even a version, not the one by Ghosh, but there's even a version when he marries his cousin, so the uncle's daughter. But also, she assigns half of the jungle to the tiger. And so this is eventually how he concludes the narrative. All you need to do is be content with what you've got. To be always craving more is a demon's lot. A word of endless appetite is a word possessed, is what your Munshi learned by way of his quest. Obviously, the Munshi is the translator, and it's Amitav Ghosh himself. Okay, so he introduces himself as the Munshi of this story. So he is quite explicit about this interpretation, but if it is not explicit enough, he also has an afterword where he says, the planetary crisis has upturned a vast range of accustomed beliefs and expectations, among them many that pertain to literature and literary forms. In the before time stories like this one would have been considered childlike and thus fair for children. But today, it is increasingly clear that such stories are founded on a better understanding of the human predicament than many narratives that are considered serious and adult. So basically, when I said he is endorsing the narrative, this is what I am referring to. Okay? He is saying this is how it is. Now, do I have another 5 minutes? Okay, so I would like to show you a few images. Obviously, being the basis of a cult, you do not only have the myth, you also have images of Bon Bibi, okay? So this is a picture that I took in the Sundarbans. This is how Bon Bibi is usually represented, okay? And so you see here, I wonder if I can you see the, no, let me, perhaps like this. Okay, so obviously here you have the tiger. Okay, the tiger. This is Bon Bibi. This is Bon Bibi's brother, who is the one who does the tough work, actually. And this is Duque sitting here. at the bottom. Okay, so they are like this. This is one of the way in which Bombibi is represented, but it's not the only one. They also have folk theater. You say jatra? To say? Okay, so you have also jatras of Bombibi. This is also a picture that I took in the Sundarbans. And this is the end of the jatra. And you have the same thing, you see? You have Bombibi here. You have the brother Shah Jangoli here. You have Duke. You have the tiger. And you also have Duke's mother. And this is the uncle. Okay, all of these characters you have there at the end. However, what is interesting is that Amitav Ghosh had his book illustrated by a completely different illustrator. That is, he chose a friend of his, Salman Tour, who is a Pakistani painter based in New York City. And he offers this kind of illustrations, okay, which are black and white because it would have been too expensive to publish it in color. But this is how he interprets the story. And Amitav Ghosh contends, and I agree, having read it, that the writing and the images complement each other. So the book is a different experience when you look at it with images and without them. So this is another example. This is very beautiful. This is Duque's mother when the uncle and Duque himself are leaving towards the jungle. And this is one of the examples of how the book is illustrated. But the book has yet another kind of existence. Do you know who this man is? No idea. This is Ali Sethi. Okay. Now, the book also exists as an audiobook. Okay. But it's not just an audiobook where the story is read aloud. Ali Sethi actually composed music for the book. So what we have is an audiobook where Ali Sethi himself is reading the book and has added music to that. Because when you're listening to the audiobook, you don't have the images. And then you have the music, which stands for the images in the project. So I would like you to hear a few seconds of this thing. Let me see. Just a second. Oh, let me disconnect it. No, the point is that it is connected to the... Let me see. Can you hear it? Okay. So I'm sorry you could not hear it so well. But the idea behind it is that, okay, fine, it's here. So the idea behind it is that, I don't know whether you could hear the lyrics of the song. The song said, more, 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 give me more, more, more. That's all that I can take. There's more that I don't know. And all of it for free. So that's the greed of Dona, the uncle, who is actually arriving there. And he wrote, since this is one of the important passages, he wrote a refrain for that. So if you listen to the whole audiobook, you have several such refrains throughout the story. And what is also interesting is some of these songs are in English, like the narrative. Some of these songs are in, I believe, in Hindi. Well, I'm sure they are Hindi. And some of these are in Bangla. So you have different languages even brought together in the story. So this is, the audio is not so good, so it doesn't matter. I just wanted to show you how this particular picture is also represented by the music. But take my word for it, please, as it would be too difficult. And this one as well. So those particular important moments in the story which were represented through images are represented through music, dedicated music in the audiobook. Okay, and that all, this is another interesting thing that Amitav Ghosh organized, using the music by Ali Sethi. He put up a kind of musical. These are the students of Penn University in Pennsylvania, obviously. Penn University, where they were putting up a show using Ali Sethi's music. Okay. And you can find it on, I have some, well, you can see some of it, but not so much listen to it. Anyway, these are the men arriving in the Sundarbans. Soon they will be lost in a kind of hallucination, which, okay, they are going through the forest, and then they are lost. They hear spatial sounds, and then they have hallucinations, and this is all the doing of Dokin Ray. Okay, and this is how it was represented in the story. And again, this is something that I would have shown you through pictures, but also through the music. Anyway, you can find it on Vimeo, and I strongly recommend that you watch it, or at least you read to the story. Basically, what I wanted to point out at the end is how Toru Dutta and Amitav Ghosh translated these different, say, traditional stories into English verse, and for a similar purpose. Okay, so they put very much, a lot of themselves into the translations. They are not simply translations like Lal Behari De's translation. So obviously it was important to Toru Dutta to talk about the plight of a widow, and she has that. To say that women should enjoy more freedom and agency, and then you find that. And also to point out that spirituality rather than wit should win the husband back. And that's where, what you have there. And that's what should be understood by an international audience. And the same thing is for Amitav Ghosh. He is telling the story. Obviously, he is not establishing the cult of Bon Bibi outside the Sundarbans. That's nobody's intention. But he is proposing an alternative, a different model of relationship between humans and nature. And definitely, this is what is important to him. A different way of telling, a different way of imagining the relationship between humans and nature, okay? Where nature has agency, nature can somehow speak to humans, and where humans should be humbler and should never be greedy, this is very important to him. This he has written in many an essay, and this he has put into his translation. So that was it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for that enriching talk. I'll open the session for the students in case our students and the faculties have any question. And before opening it to the students and faculties, I would first of all request our respectable chair, our Dean sir, Professor Dr. Shubhirdhar sir, for his comments and his words, and then we will open it for the students. Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for this very illuminating talk. You know, when I told you that we were looking forward to something which was new, something which could set our brain cells working, this is exactly what we have got today. Because you see, what Professor has done is to show us a slice of Indian responses to folk stories, folk traditions, and so and so. And this is, of course, 100-year plus a story that he has told us. From Lal Bihari De, Reverend Lal Bihari De, Toru Dutta, to finally Amitav Ghosh. Now, there are several questions, and maybe I'm going to ask a couple of questions myself later on. But more important is what our students and our faculty have to say, or any queries that they have. Yes, please.
Sir, this is a personal question of mine because I have personally heard the stories of Born Baby a lot from my mother and grandmother. I just wanted to ask you this: what interested you to do a lecture on this, on Bengali folk tales and folk culture?
Well, the answer for me is that it is fascinating for me. And basically, I've been studying Amitav Ghosh for a long time. I published my first book on Amitav Ghosh in 2012, and I've been following him ever since. Now, as he turned to consider folklore as more important than novels, this is something that I respect very much. You know, he is a very famous novelist. When he did this translation, he was taking a huge risk, really. You know, he has his affectionate readers. He is an established publisher of novels and a bestseller in many ways. And he is writing something completely different. And he does it because he believes really in what he's doing. So, and I thought, well, this is really worth much respect. And so I think this is possibly what drew me to this,
Thank you, sir.
this research.
Thank you, sir, for the lecture. I have just one question. That is, when it comes to Toru Dutta or Amitav Ghosh, they are all canonical writers of English literature. They are, as you have said, that they have got all backup and bestsellers, all that. In the context of environmental humanities or eco-criticism, whatever you call it, or in the context of folk literature as well, my question is, what do you think about the importance of finding out the the marginal voices, authentic experiences, or the least known writers, those who are writing about their experiences on, suppose, Sundarbans or Bono Bibi and these things. So what is your thought on that? Like, should we move away from the grand narratives and this canonical text, and we try to focus more on the authentic experience and the authentic lived experience of some people? So how do you look at it? It's a question. Thank you, sir.
Now, what I really find interesting in these two narratives is how they relate to word literature. when I say word literature, I'm talking about a system of literature, a literary system that moves beyond the language in which something is written, beyond the nation, and beyond the community of intended readers. And moving beyond that is actually opening up, communicating to the whole world. And now, every novel, every story, every fiction has, let's put it, a realistic, something true in it, some truth in it, and it has something which is made up. Now, it's not very important, in my opinion, whether what is true is actually copied from the reality and what is made up is more or less, how to say, convincing, I don't know, probable. Okay. Probability is not so important. What I am really interested in is the kind of insight that may be expressed through literature. And so the insight may be expressed in many different ways. Actually, Amitav Ghosh is expressing the same concept in his non-fiction and in Jungle Nama. Okay, so one is a myth, one is a completely fantastic story, and the other one is actually non-fiction. And yet the insight is the same. So I don't think that we should or should not pursue truth in a way rather than in another one. Each of us, I think, has his or her own way, and each writer have their ways of telling stories. What is really important is what kind of insight lies at the core of the story. And I think this is really important and very modern, even in the case of Toru Dutta nowadays.
Yes, please, in the back.
Hello, sir. Thank you for the talk and thank you for coming to our department. I was just wondering when I was listening to you, especially the last part, where you brought in the aspect of the performative. Now, if we look back to Peggy Phelan, and her entire work in her ontology of performance, where she's talking about the fact that the performance kind of negates the existence of the original and creates the performance to be the original. So do you think when we are talking about Jungle Nama in the form of an audiobook, or when we are trying to bottle down the struggle of the people of Sundarban in general, or a particular clan of people who are known as like in the jungle goers or the workers of the jungle. So do you think we are trying to decentralize, in decentralizing the narrative, are we really making the performance the highlight, or do we really go back to the cult of Bono Bibi and in projecting it as larger than life? Do you think the performative aspect of it is becoming larger than the struggle of the post-colonial?
Well, I don't see the point with the post-colonial, honestly.
Because you're talking about the performative aspect at length.
But where is
so do you
post-colonial
think,
there?
my question is whether you are, as a perspective of yours, do you want to present that it is more like the dilution of what has been presented, that the text has been presented as a post-colonial reading? Do you think the performance is overshadowing that? Or do you think it is a continuum of the reading of the text merely?
Well, let me say one thing. I don't think that there is any post-colonial reading to these novels by these stories by Amitav Ghosh. Or in other cases, yes, definitely. Namely, in his Opium trilogy, Ibis trilogy, that's very post-colonial. But I don't think here he's being post-colonial. He's mostly interested in the Anthropocene, And
No, I'm not talking about the reading of the post-coloniality of the novels. I'm saying the concept of reading the entire situation from the post-colonial perspective. As in the situation of Sundarban, the situation of Buno Bibi, and the narrative, and the concept of, the localized narrative that is being brought to the front, is that being shadowed by the performative aspect of the performances that you have highlighted?
no, the point is that I don't see any post-colonial scope in this in this Jungle Nama project. So I cannot say that the performance overshadows that in any possible way, because I don't see it. That's my problem. So I'm afraid I cannot help you in this. What I can say is that definitely the performance is able to stand for itself, like the audiobook is able to stand for itself. But if you are a spectator or if you are a reader or a listener. Now, if you are a literary critic, then it's a different dimension altogether. Then they are all different insights into the same story. And they are a kind of dialogue, with one another. If you look at that from the point of view of the scholar, if you look at it from the point of view of the spectator, or the point of view of the reader, or the point of view of the listener, I think they are perfectly able to stand alone.
Yes, Professor. The button is at the base.
Well, you this way. Excuse me. Perhaps the battery.
Buon pomeriggio professore, sono connesso al Dipartimento di Italiano all'Università di Sister Nivedita. Adesso sto facendo una domanda in inglese in modo che tutti capiscono. How the Indian melodrama is accepted in Italy?
Don't know, but
Grazie.
no, I'm afraid I can't answer this question because there's no knowledge whatsoever of Indian theater in Italy. The only forms of Indian theater that have made it to Italy are Bharatanatyam and, to a certain extent, Orisi and Kathakali. Those are the only forms of Indian theater that you can see in Italy. Jatras or even dramas or whatever other newer or different forms of theater are not known in Italy at all. Sorry about
Grazie. Grazie per la delizione lezioni.
Prego.
Grazie.
Thank you, sir, for that very insightful talk. This is a little bit of a comment and a question. So when we are talking about Toru Dutta's take, let's say, on Savitri, I was also getting reminded of the way the Victorian writers, especially the Victorian women writers, are changing the representation of women, you know, most famous being Jane Eyre, and they're talking of agency, not necessarily just about financial agency, but, as you said, spiritual and intellectual agency. So my question is, how much do you think that Toru Dutta was being influenced by her reading of Victorian literature, one? Number two, I know that you said that it was obviously published by her father, so I don't know whether she had any intention of publishing, and therefore was she kind of speaking with a kind of perspective, or rather an intention of how it would be taken or appreciated or looked at from the outside, from England, how it would be accepted in England, and was she trying to speak to that culture as well? And the second part of the question is, how do you place her, therefore, in the context of the very contentious relation, as you said, of the Bengal Renaissance with the business of being an Anglophile?
Well, that's a lot.
Sorry.
No, anyway, thank you for your comments. Now, I cannot say for sure. However, I think that she was heavily influenced by, say, proto-feminist English writers or English intellectuals. I think that was very much the mood of Cambridge School for Women, where she studied. Definitely they were the cutting edge of women intelligentsia in England, and she felt very much part of that movement. So I think that she was actually influenced by that. And as for spirituality, something I didn't mention is that the whole Dutt family, at a certain point, except the mother, they converted to Christianity. And in particular, they are influenced by St. Paul, for whom the spirit is much more important than any other kind of religious exteriority. So I think that is also something that she brought from there. But still, this is very important. You see her Christianity in her private letters, in her journal, but you don't see that in any of her published works, except for this. But of course, spirituality is not something that belongs to Christianity only. So definitely she is able to see that as something that can be translated into the language of any religion. And she is doing it with Hinduism as well. So I don't know whether this answers your question. And the third question was, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, you were talking about the contentious relationship of the business of being the Anglophile, whether there is attraction and repulsion. So how would you place Toru Dutt in that context, within the context of Bengal Renaissance?
Unfortunately, she died when she was still very young, and definitely she was not in the position of developing her own independent mind on this. She lived in a context which was very Anglophile. I mean, back then, you know, people like his father, like Ramesh Chandra Dutt, other intellectuals, they had this discussion clubs, they discussed English novels, and they discussed in English even when they found themselves among Bengali people. So that made very little sense in a way. And yet that was the thing. You know, I've been recently to the Calcutta Club, and they would not let me in without a tie, which I found so preposterous being in India. Anyway, that was the way they were. It was a kind of game, I believe, for them to be Anglophile, a kind of glue that kept those people together in many ways. And I don't know how really serious they were about it. In fact, that somehow their Anglophilia bounced back at a certain point, and they starting, like Toru Dutt herself, studying Sanskrit or studying the classics and writing back to the center. So definitely, I think that was a very short phase anyway, and possibly that was a short phase not only in the history of Bengali culture, but it was a short phase also in the personal history of many take Bankim Chandra, for example. He wrote his first novel in English, and it was a very nice novel. I think it's called Rajmohan's Wife. I liked that novel a lot. But then afterwards, he decided to write only in Bangla. And definitely, yes, that thing existed, but for many people, I think it was just a short phase.
Thank you so much.
Well, this is something, an observation we've already talked about, but I'll just add on a bit to it. And that is, you see the frame of Christianity. Around this time, there were three important figures, Indians, Bengalis specifically, who had converted. Lal Bihari was one, Toru Dutta and her family rather, her father rather, and number three, Michael Madhusudhan Dutta. So you see, these are three people who were, people who had converted. And I was wondering whether, you could bridge, say, these three people and Amitav Ghosh, who is obviously, not a Christian in that sense. So does this issue of religion impact on their attitudes to the literature and the thoughts they're, translating?
This is a very, I feel a little bit, being Italian, I feel a little bit awkward talking about these issues. Anyway, I'm just pointing it out for you. Anyway, thus said, my impression is that for them, converting to Christianity was the same as for many intellectuals of Ghosh's generation to be secular. That is to say, they could hardly think of a secularism like we think of secularism today. But for them, Hinduism was charged with a lot of superstition, it was too popular for them. They were very highbrow people. And they thought that a religion coming from abroad was something that could somehow grant them spirituality without being taken for people from ordinary people. That's exactly the same that happened in the West during the 60s and 70s and even now. So there are many Westerners who are unhappy with their religion, but they are attracted to, say, Buddhism or even Hinduism. And the reason is that they see too much popular religion in their own tradition, and they just perceive the spirituality of the books and of the religion that comes from afar. So I think it's exactly the same thing. For the generation of Amitav Ghosh, they were very much inspired by secularism for several reasons, and they thought that religion could be dangerous. The same thing is for, I think, people like the Dept family, etc. They thought that religion needed to be somehow purified in order to cater to their spiritual needs. And since Christianity was coming from afar, it came to India, to them at least, as purified, exactly as Hinduism or Buddhism arrived in Europe or in America as kind of purified. No one there are many Hinduists among Italians, for instance. In Milan, there are a couple of Hindu temples where Italians are going, okay? But you don't have people with orange symbols or with, conches or all of those things which would actually repel them if they saw it. They are actually repelled by similar kinds of religious piety that they see in Italy. So they are very much for that kind of spirituality which comes in a very tranquil way with mantras, with meditation, maybe with meats also. but something in a way more intellectual than popular. So this is what I think about this. This is why I think they converted, because I can really see no good reason otherwise. They could have become Brahmo. That would have been another option, and possibly they took it into consideration. I don't know their history well enough.
Well, yes, thank you. I certainly tend to agree with you. The reason is, of course, once again, if you think of the Bone Bibi story, once again, this is a story which is a matter of faith among both Hindus as well as Muslims. So you see, it's a kind of a shared space in which both the religions come together. And maybe this is one of the reasons why the secularist that you make that Amitav Ghosh is turning to this myth.
I absolutely agree with you. Thank you. Thank you for pointing it out.
I think with that, we can close the question and answer session. Thank you, Professor, for this talk and I think the discussion that followed, and for accepting our invitation and coming here. I would also
Thank
like
you for
to
inviting me.
Our pleasure. And I would also like to thank the chair of the session, our Honorable Dean, Sir, Professor Dr. Shubir Dhar, Sir. And I would also take the opportunity to thank our Chancellor, Sir, with whose support and encouragement we can do all the programs. Our Vice Chancellor, Sir, who could not be with us because of some other engagements today, but has always given us his blessings. And to all the students who have been here, the faculties from our department and from the other departments who have taken their precious time to be here to attend the talk. Also to the media persons and technical staffs and the non-teaching staffs who always are behind the curtain and help us to make each and every event successful. So I, on behalf of Department of English, Sister Nivedita University, thank all of you for joining us. Yeah, the media persons, yeah, and the Masscom department from where the media persons are there. That's what I mentioned, media persons, for always covering our programs and for being there as a constant support. Yeah, so thank you, everyone.
Thank you from me as well.